People are awfully forgiving, or they just don't understand, what's been done to them.
We are at an epochal shift. We're at a point where the West could tip into complacent and quite well off redundancy, or we could play a decisive role in the future.
What the banks did was reprehensible. That was why there was the outrage at the greed of the bankers when we gave them money that was supposed to help them lend to others, but they decided to use that money to pay themselves bonuses. For what? For record losses?
We are governed by corporations today, often by corporations that don't have very much interest in the United States of America.
I don't know what happened, man. What happened to the United States? It went so far in the ditch. At what moment did it all go bad? Was it disco? Was it Donna Summer? Is that what killed America?
We are entering the age of consequence. A rapacious financial system, escalating organized violence, abject poverty for billions, and the looming environmental fallout are all converging at a time when governments, religion, and mainstream economists have stalled. War, conquest, famine, and death. The four horsemen are coming.
What's happened is that we have moved from a relatively empty world to a relatively full world. That is, empty of us and all of our stuff to now full of us and all of our stuff. In my lifetime, the world population has tripled. And the populations of other things, of cars, houses, boats, all these other things that put a load on the environment too, just like human bodies, those have vastly more than tripled. So the world is very, very full of what we might call man-made capital. And it's becoming more and more empty of what used to be there, what we might call natural capital.
We are the first generation, we in the rich developed world are the first generation to have got to the end of the real benefits of economic growth. For hundreds of years, the best way of raising the real quality of human life has been to raise material living standards. And that's what's driven the huge rises in life expectancy and increases in happiness and other measures of well-being. But all those have now come detached from economic growth. And although life expectancy continues to rise in the rich world, it's no longer related to the amount of economic growth a country has at all. And the same is true of measures of happiness and measures of well-being.
The paradox is the more we grow, the more poverty we create. Our self-interested economic system seems to be continually missing a trick, So as we keep plundering the Earth's natural capital, is it time to rethink our Western definition of progress?
When I look at the world, I look at it much the way Royal Dutch Shell looks at it. They have one of the best strategic entities in the world, private or public. And Royal Dutch Shell has posited two scenarios. One is called Blueprint and is obviously a planned corporate structure where world leaders get together and they think about things like energy transformation, planetary warming, and dwindling fossil fuels and so forth. The other is called Scramble. And Scramble is pretty much what it sounds like too. It's a mess. Interestingly enough, in 2075, the ending year for these scenarios, as I recall, we get to about the same place. It's just that Blueprint leaves a lot less blood on the floor. Scramble leaves a lot of blood on the floor as people fight for these resources and so forth.
The reason oil companies are drilling miles under the sea is that the world's easily accessible oil has already been found and largely consumed. Not only are oil supplies dwindling, major new metals discoveries are becoming increasingly rare. 40% of the world's agricultural land is seriously degraded, and ever more volatile yields continue to be unevenly distributed. It may be that the looming environmental threat is not global warming, but the exhaustion of the world's resources.
We're going to have struggles for finding land sufficient to grow the agricultural products for what the United Nations says is going to be a 9 billion Earth population. We're going to struggle over non-renewable fossil fuels as they run out. I think Shell posits about 2075 they'll be gone. And we're going to struggle over things like water and other precious resources that are necessary to our life and to our economy. And this could be, as Shell says, a blueprint affair with world leaders working together to share and share alike. Or it could be a real mess, and Shell, incidentally, bets on the mess.
Just like the baby boomers' failure to look to the next generation, our outdated competitive mentality for a world of depleted resources could have devastating consequences. Our economic setup encourages one-upmanship, competition and comparison, whereas the progress humans have made over millennia has been largely based on cooperation.
In any species, in almost any animal, there is always the potential for huge conflict, because with any species, all members of that species have the same needs, so they might fight each other for food and shelter and nest sites and territory and sexual partners, all that kind of thing. But human beings have always had the other possibility. We have the possibility to be the best source of support and love and assistance and cooperation, much more so than any other animal. And so other people can be the best or the worst. You can be my worst rival or my best source of support.
In a progressive society, to meet our common economic, social and cultural needs, we must move from globalization to localization. The benefits of a communal sense of fellowship, responsibility and purpose in a life driven by production, not consumption, would lead to happiness and satisfaction. Indeed, we must ask, have our modern consumerist lifestyles made us happy?
I think if one had been living in the 19th century and somebody had told you that 100 years later people were going to be living in this extraordinary wealth and comfort, with central heating and being able to throw away such a high proportion of our food as we do, we'd imagine that we'd be living in a state of extraordinary social harmony and everything would be rosy. And it's really quite remarkable, the contrast between, if you like, the material success of our societies and the social failure.
The growth economy demands that we make consumption a way of life. He who dies with the most toys became the ambition, and retail replaced spiritual satisfaction. Unsurprisingly, sales of antidepressants skyrocketed.
The fact is that the world economy over the last few years, a good share of my lifetime, has been built either on the military or on producing items that most people don't need. and really don't even want when you come right down to it, but we all got to have them.
Consumerism is driven by our extraordinarily social nature, that we want to have the stuff so we look good in other people's eyes. It's because I experience myself through other people's eyes, the feelings of shame and embarrassment or pride and maybe feeling envied, all those things. So, the goods are just a way of, if you like, mediating the relationship between yourself and others in this extraordinarily alienated hierarchy.
What's really suffered is human relationships, family life, the things that really matter to us. And in the end, the only thing that makes human beings happy isn't money. It's very clear that past a certain level, you only get marginal gains from wealth. What really makes us happy is other people. It's our relationship with other people that's really been damaged by the last 30 years. We trust them less, we have less interaction with them, we bond less than ever before, we marry less, and marriage is under more threat than ever before. And all the associations that represent sort of permanent, unconditioned human affection are being eroded or damaged. And that's the real legacy of the last 30 years. And in some sense, we've got to recover and rehumanize our lives. Otherwise, not only will they be nasty, brutish and short, but they'll be lonely.
The West is coming to the realization that its human project is failing. The West was so convinced that if you push people to achieve as individuals, the accumulated achievement of individuals would make for a successful society. And what the West is now beginning to realize is that the individual achievement without incorporating the vulnerable community is a myth. The idea was make your own life, be individually aspiring, and then you'll be individually achieving, and then you'll be individually prosperous, and then you'll be individually happy. You end up doing that in a glass jar. And the glass jar has a limited height, and it's encapsulating, and in the end, you die of lack of oxygen. Human beings are alive because they seek attachment and because they're propelled by affection. So the isolated, achieving individual in the end implodes.
In order to find a purpose in life, it has to be outside yourself. It matters not how you construct it outside yourself, as long as it's a positive value added to society pursued. But it has to be outside yourself. It can't be yourself. If you're pursuing yourself, you're pursuing the abyss, as Nietzsche said. You are going to wind up in the abyss.
One of the most powerful cultural frameworks that shapes the way we think today in the West is the Hollywood film construction. And it follows a particular cultural pattern in that there is a beginning, there is a middle and an end, there is drama, tension, there's resolution, there's usually a goodie and a baddie, and there's usually a story told through the medium of human beings. This Hollywoodization of the way that people communicate and the way they tell stories about themselves and view their recent history has very much impacted how we look at the financial crisis. in that people look at the beginning, the middle and the end. They look at the drama around Lehman Brothers and they wanted, say, a resolution, and they wanted baddies, they wanted sacrificial victims as well. So people have focused on a few individuals. And the idea that somehow it wasn't just one or two individuals who were at the root of the problem, it was a systemic problem, that actually almost everyone who participated was in some way guilty, either of outright negligence or simply failing to ask the right questions, or simply failing to ask why money was so cheap for so many years. The idea that it was a systemic flaw is something which is very hard for people to grasp, and even harder to depict as a good story.
Perhaps there is this feeling of helplessness because we don't understand what the real problem actually is. Cleansing a few bad apples will not rectify the flaws at the heart of the Western economic system. A system that should be protecting people is in fact the very thing that's enabling our four horsemen to ride with such vengeance. The modern-day four horsemen: a rapacious financial system, escalating organised violence, abject poverty for billions, and the exhaustion of the Earth's resources, are riding roughshod over those who can least afford it. They gallop unchallenged because the cognitive map that's been put in place by our schools, universities, and our media does not encourage us to question accepted norms. Instead, there is apathy.
In a sense, I think we're rather depressed societies. We've got used to the idea that there's nothing that can be done. There is no alternative, that, we're never going to deal with these environmental problems, and we live in a dog-eat-dog society, and that's it. I think what we have to take away from this is a recognition that most of these problems can be very substantially improved by making our societies more equal, reducing the income differences, and that also helps us to solve the environmental problems. We can reach a society that is qualitatively better for all of us.
Well, the apathy is sort of engineered because you don't have any discussion of this in the public media, hardly by surprise. The public media are owned by the real estate and the financial interests, and they're not going to explain to people the integration between the financial, insurance, and real estate sectors, the fire sector.
There's this disinformation going on, passing the buck, denying what the real driving factors are. All of these are common strategies. In fact, even in education, you can see that banks have helped to set up universities. They've funded them. They fund think tanks. They have educational foundations. They own newspapers. All of this stuff is going on as a kind of propaganda exercise so that the people don't actually work out what the problem is.
You should not assume because you don't have a background in economics or in law that these issues are somehow too complex for you. They're not complex at all. It's very simple. It's about power, and it's about democracy, and you understand that just as well as I do.
One source of this disinformation is the neoclassical school of economics. These economists and academics have been successful in convincing the world that their models were gospel. But just as Gutenberg's printing press was revolutionary in the 16th century, today we're at the dawn of internet enlightenment, which will remove the cloud of ignorance upheld by academic and media gatekeepers. Education can be a form of mass mind control, and it's astonishing that today neoclassical economics continues to be taught in all Ivy League universities.
I do get letters from students in economics departments at other universities. They're into some graduate program or something, and they say, I just read such and such that you wrote, and this is the kind of thing that interests me. I'm stuck in this program here in which, I can't even talk about any of that. What's your advice? What should I do? What they're teaching you is what you're going to have to oppose, a lot of it. I mean, some of it's useful. But so some of it's useful, go ahead and learn it. And the other reason for learning the rest of it is know your enemy.
An individual might not be able to change the system, but they can change themselves. If we're not offered proper education, we must begin our own. And a good place to start is to become reacquainted with the classical economists, and with something that so few question, but that affects us all, our system of money.
If the monetary system of the world is not reformed, then we are headed towards the end of industrial civilization. I won't say that we're going to the end of humanity, but it's just going to be an absolute collapse of our world as we have known it, because it cannot function on fiat money. And none of those who are responsible for this want to admit it, but that is the fact.
The fiat system of money is a man-made law, and it's been abused. Is there a form of money whose law is not set by man?
When you look at natural law and gold, I sort of describe gold as being a natural form of money. All of the gold that's been mined throughout history still exists in its above-ground stock. It's about the size of 2.5 Olympic swimming pools if you put all that gold together in one place. The key is that this above-ground stock of gold grows by about 1 3/4% per annum, which is approximately equal to New World population growth, and is approximately equal to new wealth creation. So as the net result of this is that you have this very good consistency in gold's purchasing power over long periods of time, because the supply-demand equation is very much in balance. To achieve human liberty, you really need to have sound money, and gold is the only way to do that, because only gold is outside of the control of politicians.
With modern man-made monetary processes, a chronic excess of debt has built up at every level of society. Debt is now regarded as normal. It isn't. It's a form of slavery. But how much do we question our debt? And what should we now do about it?
The classic example, most recently, of a debt cancellation was the German economic miracle in 1947. The Allies canceled all domestic and international German debts, except for the debts that employers owed their employees for the previous few weeks, and except for a basic working balance that everybody was able to keep in the bank in order to buy food for the next few weeks or so. Essentially, you would follow the 5 or 6 pages that the currency reform of 1947 did in Germany. You would start with a clean slate. That means that everybody would own their property free and clear. And the problem here is that you'd wipe off the savings that are the counterparts of that. That actually would not be such a bad thing if you look at the fact that the wealthiest 1% of Americans have concentrated an enormous amount of wealth in their own hands, more than at any earlier time since statistics have been kept.
Our system of taxation also needs addressing. Currently, we're taxed on what we produce. Perhaps it would be more progressive to tax what we consume. How many American people realize that the Founding Fathers never intended Americans to be taxed on their labor? In other words, they weren't meant to pay income tax. The tax system that was exported from Britain, a relic of colonialism, has duped the world.
The most important element of a tax system is to do what everybody expected to be done in the 19th century, and that is to base the tax system on land taxation, on the free lunch of land value, and on what John Stuart Mill called the unearned increment, the income that landlords made in their sleep, as he put it.
Who made oil in the ground, coal or iron ore? These are things which are not the products of human effort. Of course, extracting them is, but their existence is not. And so the rents from natural resources are a wonderful source of taxation. Nobody made them, and when you do tax them, you cause all of us to use them more efficiently. So this seems like really the excellent thing to tax, rather than labor and capital.
If the governments used this land site value that's supplied by nature, not by human labor, not by personal enterprise, then the government would not have to tax wages in the form of income tax. It wouldn't have to imply sales tax that add to the price of doing business, and it wouldn't have to add the proliferation of business taxes.
This tax system, advocated by all the classical economists, would begin to address global poverty, as it would allow citizens in developing countries to keep their resource wealth. In developed countries, it would begin to address our housing and debt crisis and unleash the kind of entrepreneurship needed to refloat our economies. Perhaps we should also resurrect another timeless principle for workers that was promoted during the Industrial Revolution.
Well, the idea that people who work in a plant ought to own it is just deeply built into working class culture. So right around here at the early Industrial Revolution in the late 19th century, working people simply took for granted that, yes, of course, the workers should own the mills in which they work. Anything else is an attack on our fundamental rights as free citizens. They also took for granted that wage labor is hardly different from slavery. It's different only because it's temporary, and then you can be free. One of the ways you can be free is by owning your own plants. That was not an exotic view. That was Abraham Lincoln's view. In fact, it was a principle of the Republican Party in the late 19th century. It's taken a lot of effort to drive those ideas out of people's heads, but they're still there, and they are very relevant.
It was the Greek philosopher Plato who said the ratio of earnings between highest and lowest paid employee in any organization should be no more than 6-1. In 1923, banker J.P. Morgan declared no more than 20-1 was optimum. Yet today's salary difference between top and bottom earners in global corporations can be higher than 500 or 1,000-1.
When you're up in the range of 500-1 inequality, the rich and the poor become almost different species, no longer members of the same community. Commonality of interest is lost. And so it's difficult to form community and to have good, friendly relationships across class differences that are that large.
When the public do vent their outrage at inappropriate earnings, the common defence is to move the debate to the psychological realm and quote mercurial British economist Herbert Spencer. He coined the phrase survival of the fittest, and his words are now used to justify excess. Competition in business is a good thing, but the playing field must be level. Monopolists have too much because the system they game is rigged. Under the current economic setup, the fitness of the vast majority of the world's population is irrelevant. Those that are made to pay for this crisis are not those that caused it. But those who caused it, for survival, will no doubt try to marginalize this film as socialist or even Marxist.
I'm a capitalist. I'm a business person. I believe in the basic principles. That's why I'm completely appalled by seeing these principles destroyed by monarchs, monopolists, who have totally destroyed the system from within on Wall Street, and this is completely unacceptable.
I'm a capitalist. I think capitalism can do it. It's not a question of getting rid of capitalism. It's a question of getting rid of this terrible form of capitalism.
Capitalism, more broadly understood as market economy, not only has a future, I can't see the future of the world without it. But the question is, what kind of capitalism? What kind of market economy?
A system of reformed capitalism built on independent money, a tax system based on consumption, not income, and employee-owned businesses would begin to build an economy that's not dependent on constant growth to service its debt. We've endured the so-called free market for centuries, but far from being free, it's led us to destroy nature and each other in a vain attempt to progress.
It's absolutely ludicrous to suggest that somehow there is a scientifically defined boundary of the market that we should never change. And of course, that's what the free market economy wants you to believe. Because once they convince you of that and claim that, on top of that, claim that they have the truth because they are PhDs in economics, then they can tell you whatever they want, and then you'll have to accept it. But that's where we have to take these guys on. Politics is about drawing the boundary of the market. When you think about it, a lot of things have been taken out of the market over the last 2-3 centuries. 2-3 centuries ago, you could buy and sell human beings, child labor, a lot of things that you wouldn't imagine you could buy and sell today. So, I mean, over time, we have redrawn this boundary, and there's nothing wrong with redrawing the boundary again.
Things that were considered absolutely reasonable in the 1850s, like selling any chemical on a street corner and telling you that it's a pharmaceutical drug that will be good for you, things like that were absolutely commonplace then, are now serious criminal offences. Well, the same thing will be true of active money management in 100 years.
The breakdown we saw in the Great Depression and witnessed again at the beginning of the 21st century occurred because in the name of growth, much was taken out of the system by those who contribute very little. Multinational corporates and banks will always want to grow without having to compensate those people who actually do the work to produce the surplus. In the past, every time too much was taken by those who contributed little, people rose up to halt the violent practices enacted by a tangible enemy. Today, the question is, with such a formless enemy pervading every element of our economic and democratic process, can it be done again?
Of course it can be done again. Look, it's a cycle. I mean, we're not debt peons, but maybe rats running around a little wheel in somebody's big cage somewhere. The finance rises, finance becomes organized. You make a lot of money in banking. It's easy to go out and buy politicians. But the essence of democracy, the essence of American democracy, is this is a repeated confrontation, a repeated showdown. And in the 1830s, Andrew Jackson beat the second bank of the United States. In the early 1900s, Teddy Roosevelt beat J.P. Morgan and John D. Rockefeller. In the 1930s, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, beat everyone from Wall Street. And now we have to do it again.
The one single thing that makes me optimistic rather than cynical, pessimistic, is my students. First, I do not see the desire to go to Wall Street amongst them. I see the opposite. Second, I see a disdain amongst them for people who are motivated. Not just they don't want money, I see a disdain amongst them for people who do just want money.
The crises we face today are created by humans. And what is created by humans can be changed by humans. So we are all capable of transforming our world.
Revolutions are philosophical. Getting organized and preventing the culprits camouflaging the real problem means it's possible to embark on a bloodless revolution against the violent organizations and barbaric leaders who've trashed the economy. Central banking, rigged capitalism, land speculation, income tax and neoclassical economics have corporatized democracy, stunted progress, perverted the course of human destiny and compromised the future of this planet. If these issues aren't addressed, then the next implosion will be on a scale unimagined. Whatever the propaganda, at the beginning of the 21st century, central banks' unregulated cheap money pumped up land values, which created an unsustainable asset bubble in a world that once again operates a rigged tax system that enriches entrenched privilege. Neoclassical economics have ruined life for the bottom billions, tempted everyone into intergenerational conflict, and created massive suffering that has no limits. Human beings go mad in crowds and come to their senses slowly and individually. History is littered with examples of people who threw themselves off the yoke of oppression to adopt radical change, only to end up with popular new rulers that maintained the status quo. To really understand something is to be liberated from it. Dedicating oneself to a great cause, taking responsibility, and gaining self-knowledge is the essence of being human. A predatory capitalist's truest enemy and humanity's greatest ally is the self-educated individual who has read, understood, delays their gratification, and walks around with their eyes wide open.